All right. Topic one has a lot to it. So we'll move on to changing environments, which is there's a little bit fewer things that we just do more process oriented. So we're going to talk about urbanization and which relates to centripetal population movements and centrifugal population movements such as suburbanization and counter-urbanization. Okay. This is just a nice little graph, shows the growth of cities over time. You see cities are growing and expected to grow more and more by 2030. So urbanization is the increase in the proportion in a population, whatever place you're talking about, that are living in urban areas. And there's four common causes, and these are called centripetal. Centripetal are things that draw people into an area, kind of like when you go over a loop in a roller coaster, you get stuck to the inside. You don't even need that handlebar, even though you should probably put that thing down anyway. But it'll keep you inside as centripetal forces. So anyway, we've got natural increase, which just means that birth rates are higher than death rates. More young people move to urban areas typically, and they start families, and that causes the urban population to increase. Pretty simple, easy peasy. Birth rates. Rural to urban migration, that's just the prospects of people moving from rural to urban areas, especially in low income and middle income countries. A lot of this has already happened in high income countries. That's why you're not seeing urban areas in high income countries expected to grow a lot. In fact, you almost have the reverse, which we'll talk about in a second. But you've got rural to urban migration. Gentrification is reinvestment of capital into inner city areas, which was usually you have improvement of residential areas in particular. That's a centripetal thing that's going to bring people, particularly high income people, wealthier people, into an urban area. And then reurbanization or urban renewal is where you have an actual planned revitalization. Gentrification can be a little spontaneous, and then it kind of happens over time. Reurbanization, urban renewal is a planned idea for something. Okay, we had a video about gentrification you can check out at your leisure. I'm gonna do that. All right, centrifugal is the opposite. So centripetal draws people toward a city. Centrifugal is like a centrifuge. It's gonna circle around, around, around. It's gonna get people stuck to the side, like one of those crazy amusement park rides where you're in that dome thing or that gyrosphere that spins you around. You're like puking. It's like stuck to the side. It's disgusting. Anyhow, means outward expansion. There's a couple different forces related to this. Suburbanization is a common one. People move out away from city centers, i.e. to the suburbs. They commute for work. It's usually because there's transportation. There's usually built up infrastructure, lower costs of housing in the suburban areas, expansion of housing supply. The local government starts to have stability out there. They're going to provide more administrative services. And there's another thing called counter-urbanization, which is where people move away from larger urban areas to smaller urban areas or new communities on the edge or the fringes. And then you get this creation of these new city centers over time. Out in the Treasure Valley of Idaho, we're kind of feeling that. We're a little bit of counter-urbanization where Boise has kind of like suburbanized, and now Meridian kind of has its own city center. Eagle has its own little city center. Nampa, Caldwell, those areas around there have their own city center. Star is starting to develop one over time as it's becoming from rural to suburb to almost counter-urban. We take a look at that. But a couple issues of urban growth. Urban sprawl is one issue where you have this uncontrolled, spontaneous growth of urban areas, like a little mole, like I said, a little mole reaching its fingers out, not the mole that digs, like a mole on your skin. It's unchecked, spontaneous growth. You also have issues of infrastructure, so providing infrastructure for people as the urban area grows, water, sanitation, waste disposal, communications, and transport networks. Rapidly growing urban suburban areas will experience traffic jams, air pollution, different types of urban stress also. Okay, this is the process of urbanization. I put this in your notes packet. So you can start with the rural society phase. You see the economic transition happen. It's almost kind of like that demographic transition, except here we have rural percentage of population, urban percentage of population, and how it's developing over time. Deindustrialization is a key change process that we spent some time on. So deindustrialization is where you have a long-term decline in employment and manufacturing centers, or sectors, sorry. It's usually due to job loss rather than lower productivity overall. Many inner urban areas experience this through disinvestment, which means there's outflows of capital, which means investment in factories, mechanization, transportation, things that make your business go, and then outflows of labor, which means you're hiring labor from other places or you're seeing people leave for jobs elsewhere. There's two types. There's positive deindustrialization, which is where you reduce your workforce based on increase productivity. Okay, so this is usually due to mechanization and rationalization. Rationalization just means you are using your resources more efficiently overall. You're rationing them. And then there's negative deindustrialization, which is where they decline without any rise in productivity or mechanization. This is where you see shuttered factories in Detroit and things like that. Reindustrialization is where you see almost like the place kind of regrow as a result, and that is because they move into high-tech industries or small firms or service industries, which is what happens in a lot of high-income countries. Couple things. There is an issue of scale-related deindustrialization. So automation is kind of a general thing, which is our changes in technology. You also have industrial shift. As countries get richer, they actually develop more service sectors and tech sectors of employment. Offshoring occurs as well, so the physical labor becomes more expensive. They send to lower income countries, and the industry moves its production. And then you start to lose these subsidies for industry, lack of infrastructure investment, and then you have to increase taxes as a result, and that usually leads to less economic activity. Specifically, looking at a large scale, zoomed in, larger sites are usually required as the industry grows, so it almost grows itself out of business. Transportation, global exports require locations near mass transport hubs to be more profitable. So some of those smaller scales and smaller operations will have to go out of business and move to more of like a large market. And then cities as service centers. So cities in Hicks and Mix increasingly become centers for education, retail, and commercial rather than industrial employment. That's just a thing that happens over time. There's a couple different consequences. Talked about economic, social, and demographic. If you want to pause and take a look at those, it kind of just lists them out. These are pretty common ones that you might think of on your own. One big issue, though, is like there might be new economic opportunity where you might see a stable population in a lot of urban areas that have deindustrialization. So it's going to be different depending on where you're talking about and what kind of processes and support they have in place. There's a big chart of urban deindustrialization and how it leads to urban decline. We watched a video, or you're supposed to watch a video on Detroit, Michigan. It's 19 minutes. It does a lot of good examples of what caused deindustrialization and what the consequences were. We also did a case study on Addis Ababa. So make sure you check that out or go look at that, how they're developing their infrastructure. And I think that was pretty much it for topic 2. Topic 3, I'm going to run through really quickly. I got about half my time left. What the heck? Oh, I'll have to download that later. Okay, anyway, sorry. I was just checking on my other video. If you watch a Carlyception here. Okay, last one we'll talk about is urban stress. Resilient cities is pretty straightforward. So urban stress are other things that can cause problems in urban areas. The first one's called a microclimate. Microclimate is just a small area that is different from the surrounding area. There are some examples of other ones, but the most common one is urban heat islands or urban areas that experience a microclimate where it's hotter than the surrounding areas. There's a couple reasons for this. One is albedo. So urban areas tend to have a lower albedo. Building materials have lower specific heat capacity and higher thermal conductivity, like concrete. Urban areas tend to be darker. They have taller buildings that are taking in heat. Building density and height will impact the winds, which means that you're going to have kind of different wind speeds, which is going to cause a little bit of a stagnation typically, and wind tunnels in other places, but that's going to affect the heat. Anthropogenic, so any heat caused by human activity is generally increased in an urban area. Air conditioning actually raises outside heat because it's pushing hot air outside. And then drainage systems, they have effective drainage of water, but that means there's less absorbed heat by the water, which means the air is going to be hotter. To manage this, there's several things that urban areas try to do: insulating buildings, planting vegetation and increasing green spaces, adding trees to provide shade, green roofs, which are roof-covered gardens. Painting buildings white can help a little bit. Air pollution is another common issue caused by urban areas, typically sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, and small particulates, PM 2.5 typically. And you can see urban or world air quality maps in a lot of different websites as well. Traffic congestion is the last type of urban stress other than crime and slum clearance that we'll talk about. So usually there will be variations in traffic flow. Impacts of traffic congestion can lead to several issues, though. There's increased vehicle emissions, inefficient use of economic resources due to commute times, personal stress for people, and then noise pollution as well, loud cars. We watched a video about Barcelona's Super IES or their super blocks. There's also some websites you can look at with Barcelona. They're a zero emission city. They're trying to have zero emissions. Boise is trying to be carbon neutral by taking in the same amount of carbon that they're expending by, I think, 2050 was the goal. That was a paper. Contested land use is the other type of urban stress that you're doing for your project. So it's a key impact of Brooklyn Zimmerman's favorite concept, sarcastically, power. There's two types of contested land use. There's slum clearance, which is forced eviction of people, and depletion of urban green spaces, which means over time urban areas lose their open and green spaces. You can check out those reasons if you want. They're pretty straightforward. There's also just disagreements over how the land will be zoned and used, which is a little bit different. It's not quite the type of conflict we're talking about with power differential, but there are issues, especially like not in my backyardism, NIMBYism, things like that. There's a good video here of favelas. You also looked up your own. The cycle of deprivation is something that we also talked about, and how urban areas can create deprivation and create a vicious cycle. Urban crime tends to be high for a couple of reasons: higher population densities, higher rates of poverty and other social deprivations, impacts of deindustrialization, lack of affordable housing, and then cities have implemented various ways to manage this. There they are right there. So having various different policies in place. And usually crime has a geographic distribution. You can look at any crime map and kind of see the distribution, and then you can kind of make some assumptions about what deprivations they are having in those areas. So that's the big ones. That covers topics 1 through 3. So I'm going to call it good for now. I might do topic 4 a little bit later, closer to the exam day, because you don't need that for the paper 1 assessment. So after I go through that, I'll check that one out. All right, peace.